All right. Okay. Just making sure our audio is working. So thank you so much. Technical issues as we're all in the same room for the first time. Thanks so much, Simeon. And before I get started, I'd like to ask Manzi if you can go on video as well for this. Hi, Manzi.
Hi, Steve.
All right. So as Simeon mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about go-to-market, but I want to caveat that a little bit with saying I hope everyone understands that when we as the Mojulip Foundation are having discussions with potential adopters, some of them are ready to start talking publicly about their interests. Some of them are not. And so we want to respect where they are in their process without overstepping our bounds. That's our role as a foundation of being an independent arbiter for those potential adopters. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. What I'm going to talk about today is primarily something we started talking about last time when we were all in Kigali. We had a couple of sessions to discuss what do we mean by a proof of concept? What should a proof of concept be? And we've taken that a long ways. And let me just say, Manzi has taken that a long ways. Shortly after some of those sessions, we brought Manzi on board with the foundation to help us in crafting proofs of concept. And so today is to give us the report back on some of the progress we've made on that. And I think by the end of this, you'll see how that ties into our current go-to-market situation and where we're going to go with that. And hopefully as with everything within Mojulip, this is all open source. So hopefully this is a chance for everyone to get some transparency and clarity on what our process is going to be. Then you can provide any feedback you have to us on what that process will be. And if you don't like it, and then also hopefully a chance for everyone to understand how we think that can fit into, if you're an adopter, how you use this process to understand Mojulip better. And then if you are a potential provider, how your business fits into Mojulip adoption process cycles. So without further ado, so currently this big problem is our great problem that we have right now. We have too much pipeline. And we currently have 4 letters of intent. Some of them we can talk about publicly, some not. So I'm not going to name the countries right now. But 4 countries have signed letters of intent saying they would like to explore Mojulip in a proof of concept officially. And that is one of their final options for their national payment system. And then we have 3 others that are actively exploring. And I think it's a little bit difficult to describe what that means. I would say we're defining it as if a country has said that Mojulip is definitely an option that they're looking at, then among several, number one, that they are looking at building an instant payment system. They're looking to build an inclusive instant payment system. So financial inclusion is part of the objectives of their IPS. And they explicitly want to include non-banks in their national scheme. Those are some of the criteria we would say, okay, and that Mojulip is an option that they're looking at, and they understand that it's open source. They understand a little bit about it. I think for those of you who've known me working on this for the past 4 years, when I say 3 in discussion, it's not. I've been the person who's often said, let's not get too excited. These are early conversations. These are not early conversations. These are conversations these are seriously understand Mojulip and seriously considering Mojulip as one of their options. So we've never seen a pipeline like this. I would say of the ones that we would have previously called in discussion, we probably have somewhere in the range of about 6 or 7 countries right now who are in the early stages of their consideration. So 7 very strong countries actively considering Mojulip as somewhere we've never been before. And I think a lot of that comes from our improved messaging. We've really focused in on what is Mojulip, what is the product, what the problems is the product solving, and how is it comparable in the market. And the biggest comparable that we focused on lately has been sovereignty. And I think that has been incredibly important as more and more countries are concerned about having a sovereign system that doesn't have dependencies on other countries or on software vendors. The value of open source is definitely becoming more and more apparent to a lot of countries, or at least the value of sovereignty and how an open source solution fits into sovereignty. Improve partnerships. And if I can't see the list, but if anybody from Africa and Unda is on the call, or if anybody knows the people from Africa and Unda, please send them some love. They're doing amazing things for us in terms of when they talk to countries about the importance of sovereignty, and helping countries think through sovereignty and in their inclusive payment objectives, inclusive payment system objectives. It's becoming more and more clear to countries that Mojaloop is a great option for them. So while they're not specifically advocating for Mojaloop, they're advocating for similar principles as we are, and that's been a huge boon to our pipeline. And then also having a public national implementation in Rwanda for everyone who's worked on that project. A bunch of us were just at the Inclusive FinTech forum last week in Kigali with Manzi and Simeon and Desire, and it was we were getting the various parts of the government of Rwanda are openly talking about why they chose to go with Mojaloop, and that's been another huge boon for us in terms of growing the pipeline. So great, obviously great problem to have. However, we still have the problem that means that anyone who's worked on some of these deals knows that all of the stakeholders have to understand Mojaloop before a decision is made, and a proof of concept can help with that. So if we're focused on one country, think about how many stakeholders there are. Now we have to focus on 7 countries, and helping everyone align on that, and actually growing honestly every few weeks. And that means we have to actually come up with a solution for that. And that's why I think we saw that coming last time at the last PI, and that's why we wanted to clarify what a proof of concept was. Again, anyone who's been involved in previous POCs knows that from the time that somebody asked for a POC until we were done executing it was sometimes often more than a year, and that's not possible. And also the quality was varying. So first thing we need to do is ensure that we have standard delivery of quality POCs, and also standard delivery of POCs at speed. So decision makers can make their decision when they need to make it. And that means we can't wait for fundraising. We can't wait for procurement processes. We can't reinvent the wheel for every POC. We have to be able to deliver them quickly. We also have to separate the demand and the supply. And so I think hopefully you'll hear me talking about this quite a bit of within these processes, there is the demand, which is the adopters, and there's supply, which is the potential implementers and maintainers. And making sure that there's a separation there at this decision-making point means primarily that community members, which I'm looking at who's here, mostly all of you, we don't want anybody to be disqualified from future procurement. And that's a significant risk that if a community member is part of the decision process, they will be excluded from the future procurement. And we don't think that's where any of you want to be. We also want potential adopters to have clarity on how Mojaloop provides sovereignty. And in the early days of a POC, there's a lot of unknowns. And if one of those unknowns is why is this company here, if you're telling me I'm not reliant on, or that I can be completely independent, all the explaining in the world makes that a very difficult position to understand when it is our primary value proposition in the market. And so that's why it's incredibly important that at the POC stage, we're able to demonstrate that vendor agnosticity and independence and sovereignty. And so that's why we have to make sure within the POCs, we provide that separation of the demand side of the adopters and the supply side of the implementers. And that's kind of led us to where we ended up with after the last PI, again, having several panels around what POCs should be. So I also want to define, let's see, what a national POC is. First, there are going to be other proofs of concepts. There are several, and a few of you know some about them. So we have several potential proofs of concepts that are cross-border with multiple countries, with the private sector. That's not what we're going to talk about. That is still a proof of concept. we are talking about national POCs. We're also not going to talk about subnational POCs. Everyone knows very well what WinePay is, I hope, in this meeting. That has actually been a huge driver of other countries realizing the value of something like WinePay to serve the underserved financial institutions. But that's still not for us a national level POC. So as an example, I think a lot of you are aware of the People's Clearinghouse, which is a great initiative, does not fall into the category of what we're talking about here, which is specifically sponsored by the central bank or regulator and driven by the government or hub operator to be a national level POC that is moving towards becoming the national payment system. And that the sponsor needs to define the learning objectives. And this is critical here. Those learning objectives cover both Mojo Loop and instant payments in general. Our mission is to drive not just the Mojo Loop code, but financial inclusion through instant payments. If that means that a country uses a Mojo Loop POC to learn quite a bit about inclusive payments in general, or inclusive instant payments in general, and they still choose to go with a proprietary vendor, I think but they approach that proprietary vendor with more knowledge to be able to have better vendor management. We, as a community, we need to see that as a success. Maybe not the success we really hope for, but still a success. And so these learning objectives need to cover both learning about Mojo Loop, but also learning about their own scheme and their own inclusive instant payment objectives. And lastly, publicly executed. No more do we want to have POCs which are in dark rooms with only a few people invited or even knowing about them. These are things that we should be able to publicize, talk about openly, present in our PIs of what the results were, and so that we do these things as a community. And some definitions, just so we're clear on. So this is getting into making sure that we have some standardization around POCs. When we start working with a country, we are going to start making sure that if they want something outside of this, that's great, but they're going to have to fund it themselves. It won't fall within the framework of what we're trying to provide. It's obviously got to be no real money, no real citizen data, because it's going to be cloud-based. We're going to be focusing initially on IAC deployments that are specific to that country. Meaning, we might hear about a sandbox. I think we heard about sandbox yesterday. This is not going to be something that's done in a sandbox. Every country that does a POC will have their own environment with real DFSPs connecting their test systems to that environment. It will be account to account or P2P only with phone number as an alias, as a routing. And we know that there are a lot of questions that come up from that. We're largely going to ignore most of those questions for the purposes of a POC because it has to be executed quickly. We are driving for 4 months. It also will include multiple classes of FSP, bank, mobile money, MFI. Not here is PISP. As a standard POC, we won't be including a PISP. And it will include manual settlement and manual operations. Obviously, the connections into RTGSs and settlement systems and central bank ledgers is an added complication. Not saying it couldn't be done, but saying as a standard offering, that's not what we're going to bring. Okay, so how do we solve that for us? First is Mojo Loop Foundation leading proofs of concept. And as a major announcement, we've just gotten approval for the funding to do that, at least for the first few of them. And that should take us through our existing, at least most of our existing pipeline. And that means we'll be hiring a business development lead, which I think hopefully most of you saw circling around LinkedIn as the next hire that we'll bring on, and a Mojo Loop Foundation POC technical lead. We'll be focusing only on the delivery of POCs, and I'll get into roles and responsibilities in just a little bit. So be on the lookout for 2 new members of the Mojo Loop Foundation who will be leading these processes. The next is standard documentation with community contributions, and if there's questions about these or comments, Manzi is the one who is leading this process. That means standard PIDs, onboarding and integration documents, use case documentation, stakeholder documentation. And a lot of this has been done. A lot of this has been done in projects that have been funded by a variety of donors. And we very much hope that the community is able to contribute some of these documents of what they've done before, which hopefully you see as an opportunity to shape the way projects get implemented. And so we will be looking to the community to help us with those documents, but Monzi has started that and is well into the process of them. There's, I think, Monzi has a list of about 10 or so documents that need to be standardized for every POC. And I think a lot of you know that have met with our friends from the Ghanaian government who are implementing a POC, and these documents will first be used for their POC. The standard POC project governance structure has also begun. I think a lot of us saw pretty good structure on the Rwanda POC. It will be something that replicates that, and Monzi is also putting that together for us. And then next is subcontracting community members for specific roles. And this is where I'm very open to getting some feedback. A few of you I've already reached out to, which is specific people who will be working on specific tasks for the execution of a POC. At this point, I think there are, depending on the POC, there's going to be either 3 or 4 people who will come in, and those we're hoping are going to be coming in from the community, and that will be DevOps, integration engineer, and HubOps. And yeah, so depending on the POC, there might be a need for 1 or 2 other people to come in. And there will be short-term assignments to come in and execute the POC under Monzi's supervision. And lastly, a focus on including the domestic system integrators and hub operators as much as possible. Now, as a learning objective, I mean, people only learn what they have time to learn and want to learn. If the system integrators and hub operators don't want to be a part of it, they just want to see a POC executed, fine, we're going to go for that. But if they want to be involved, then great. We want to make sure that we focus on that. And that's going to be done largely through the Mojo Loop Accelerator. I'll talk briefly about it. But if anyone wants to know more about the Mojo Loop Accelerator, hopefully you learned about it at the last PI. But Desire is the one to reach out to about that. So second last thing I want to go through is the role, the POC roles. And this is something I'm very much, actually, Monzi is very much looking to get input on from the community. A lot of you have already provided input on this, but the project sponsor needs to be somebody from the government, who is the actual, coming from the government agency who is sponsoring the POC and defining the objectives. They're the ones that need to say, this is moving in the direction of my learning objectives, or it is not. The next is the program manager. That's either from the government or a partner like Africa Nunda in a lot of cases, who's really going to be focusing on the stakeholder management. I think anyone who has ever done a pilot or a POC with us knows that one of the biggest challenges is not the actual technical integration of a DFSP. It is getting them to come to the table to learn about how to do an integration into a POC. And as the technical arm of a scheme, it's very easy for us to say that's not our job, but we have to make sure somebody is doing that. And ideally, that is a person who works directly for the project sponsor. Next is the POC technical lead, who will come from the Mojo Loop Foundation, and the Mojo Loop Accelerator lead, who will also come from the Mojo Loop Foundation, with the POC technically responsible for the central bank, hub operator, and FSP stakeholders, and the accelerator lead responsible for the system integrator and fintech participants in the POC. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we have the DevOps engineer, integration engineer, and hub operations specialist, who will be brought in as needed with very specific TORs. Very much hoping to publish those TORs so that all of you are aware. Prior to the next PI, those will be published. One of the reasons why, and now say, why are we going to publish those? Why do we want to make sure everyone's paying attention to this? Is that we want to make sure you know what assistance we're going to be asking for. So anyone who wants to put forward team members to be a part of a POC team, those are the three roles that we're going to be focusing on, and look out for the TOR so you can start making sure that your team members are experienced and qualified to fulfill those three roles. The big thing that I hope we're getting out of this is that POCs are there to drive adoption. They're not there to drive profit lines for companies at this stage. In the future, maybe. Right now, we need to focus on adoption for the pipeline that we've built. However, we want to make sure, one, that we're keeping the community engaged, and that the community sees ways to at least offset some of their costs of upskilling their team members, and that they get real world experience working with clients. At the same time, without creating any potential conflicts that could make your company ineligible from future procurements. So if you put an integration engineer who's reporting to the Moduloop Foundation for this POC, should make sure your company is not ineligible from any future procurements on that project. All right. The last thing that I want to cover before we see if there's any burning questions is that the proof of concept is not our only tool on the national engagement process. So want to make sure we have clarity amongst the community members, both the adopters and the potential implementers, of how we see this process working. The first is where we do country engagement, explaining to people what Moduloop is about. And again, one of the reasons for this is a lot of you are actually out there doing advocacy and talking about Moduloop. Have your own process, do whatever you want, it's your business. I want to be clear what our process is. So if you want to fit into our process, you know how to do it. So again, the first is country engagement, which means that's just explaining what Moduloop is, what is different about it in terms of design, what is different about it because it's open source, and what the process of deploying a Moduloop looks like, and building an instant payment system looks like. A lot of countries and adopters are very, let's say, clear about the advantages of controlling their own system, of owning their own system, but fearful of the responsibilities of ownership. And what we hope to get out of the country engagement process is more understanding of how Moduloop helps with some of that, the fear of ownership. And next is the stakeholder mapping, to make sure that we understand that, yes, everyone actually is open to doing an inclusive payment system, at which point we expect to get a letter of intent to go forward. At that point, we will be delivering the PoC Accelerator and the proof of concept. And again, from the point of letter of intent of the country saying, yes, we officially want to pursue Moduloop, we would like to be able to start executing a proof of concept in the accelerator program literally the next day. That's how fast we need to be able to move on these. And then afterwards is a letter of commitment. And it doesn't end there. We also know that in order for the adopter to understand, in order for you, a lot of you as the implementers to understand and have a clear relationship with the adopters, you need to be speaking the same language in terms of what services they're asking for, what products they're asking for, and how they want to ask for it. What we don't want is to RFPs to go out there into the market which don't clearly align with what you offer as community members. And so the last piece there around the project development is to make sure that the way that they develop their projects is aligned with how they want to do their implementation. And you all as community members and potential implementers and offerers of products on Moduloop have clarity about where the country is in their process, and you're getting clear procurement documents that you can respond to. So that is the primary purpose of that last phase, is to make sure that the people asking for help and the people offering help have clarity and are speaking the same language to be able to match up with each other. Okay. That is the end of what I have to say about POCs and the current go-to-market. Simi, do I have time for questions, or do I have 3 minutes? So if there are any questions, burning questions, or Manzi, if there's anything egregious that I missed in the presentation. Jane, question.
Comment and question. This looks great. Well done, guys. it really looks like there's been a lot of thought and a lot of consolidation of good ideas. One of the things I wanted to ask, because I think it's a point that's going to be asked at some point and require clarity. When you ask for assistance from the community, you ask various organizations in the community to put up those 3 roles. What process are you going to follow that's going to assign those people? Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Perfect sense, Jane. That is an awesome question. We don't have the answer to that right now, but the fact that that was the first question that was brought up is critical. We absolutely do not want to have this be backroom deals the way a lot of things have been done in the past. Open procurement, so I should have said something that I missed, is that when we sign a letter of intent, one of the requirements we have on the country, if we're going to provide them this assistance, is that the letter of intent is a public document. That means that they sign the letter of intent, and then the next day we can tell the community publicly. Now, we might not do a press release because it can get confusing for a lot of people to say, oh, this country is actually going to adopt Mojib, when maybe we want to wait until they make the final decision. But at least within the community, we can publicly announce that country X is going to do a POC, and we are going to be asking for nominations or applicants for those 3 roles, and they will be paid roles. And so, again, more to follow on the process, but there will be publicly available criteria explaining how we're going to make a decision on who gets those roles.
Greg, you have the last question.
Just more of a reminder, excuse me. There's a lot of deals we're going to be on together as far as the FRMS and you. We're a heck of a lot easier than you guys as far as to implement. We just have to worry about the cash flows and things like that. So somehow we have to fit in all this. We have to all work together to make sure that it all works out smoothly. We're on at least 3 right now, and to be honest, I'm tracking 8. So there's going to be a lot of interplay there. The people that need to work on this need to be able to work with both sides, with like the FRMS stuff and Mojib predominantly, because you guys are a lot harder. So, and the main thing, we kind of come along for the ride. So we've got to work together on that.
Definitely. Thanks, Greg. And then, yeah, I think there's a few that we are definitely aware of. Do want to highlight, though, I know a couple of them you're thinking of are not national POCs. That's a different category for us, just for complete clarity with you and your team.
Correct.
But yeah, absolutely. And I hope that your team will start working with, again, the purpose of the standardization is so that everyone that we work with, like you guys, is clear. Okay.
Yeah, we're just working through.
All right. That's my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steve. Manzi, good to see you. Actually, Manzi, could you just say hi so that everybody hears your voice? I think this is the first time they're hearing the voice.
Thank you, Simeon. Yeah, Manzi Olivier, connecting from Kigali. I think we met quite a number of people from Zanzibar and Kigali. Happy to have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manzi.
Yeah.